Okay, so we are going to start the second week for the supplemental class. This is going to talk about conditional statements, equivalent statements, biconditionals. We'll get a little bit into De Morgan's laws and negations of conditional statements. Okay, so we should know by now what a conditional statement is. If P, then Q. So typically they're going to look like that in symbolic notation. Okay, so for this example, we're looking at if you work at this job for at least 3 months, then you will have saved enough money for a down payment on a used car. So it's this one right here. Okay. The words that come after the if are always referred to as the antecedent. Okay. And the part of the sentence that comes after the word then is called the consequent. So P is the antecedent and Q is the consequence. Okay. So what part of the above conditional is the consequence? Well, that's the part that comes after the then. So you will have saved enough money for a down payment. Okay, that's what we're going to refer to as the consequence. Okay, I don't know that that's going to necessarily show up on a test, but we're going to talk a lot about the antecedent and the consequence, so we need to understand what those words are. Okay, all right, then we're going to come down here and let's look at a little bit more of this. So here's a conditional statement. If you live in the state of Minnesota, then you live in the United States. Okay. And hopefully we can all agree that that is true. Okay? So that is a statement where P is you live in Minnesota. And Q is you live in the United States. Okay? So this is of the form if P, then Q. Okay? And we should know that the converse just reverses both of those. Okay? So it's Q, then P. So the converse would be if you live in the United States, then you live in the state of Minnesota. It just switched those two around. Okay? And, an easy example of that would be we live in Illinois, okay? So we live in the United States, but we don't live in Minnesota. So the converse doesn't have the same truth as the conditional statement, okay? So we're not just switching the order. The if gets attached to the second part. So if you live in the United States, then you live in Minnesota, okay? Which is not a true statement. Okay, so be careful with that. All right, then we get to talking about the inverse. Okay, and your inverse simply negates both of them. So it doesn't change the order. If I take my original statement, P implies Q, this just negates both of them. And it becomes not P implies not Q. So if you don't live in Minnesota, then you don't live in the United States. Okay? So does this have the same meaning? No, because we don't live in Minnesota, but we do live in the United States. Again, picking someone in Illinois. Okay? So the contrapositive is the last one. The contrapositive negates both of the statements and switches the order. Okay, so this would be if you don't live in the United States, so we took the negation of Q, then you don't live in Minnesota. Okay, and what do we think of that? I think it's true. If you don't live in the United States, then there's no way you could live in Minnesota. Okay, so in general, a conditional statement and its contrapositive have the same truth value. Okay, I think you'll have some problems like that in your homework. Okay. However, the converse and the inverse are not guaranteed to have the same truth. Okay. So let's come down here. Here's our first example. If you work at this job for at least 3 months, then you will have saved enough money for a down payment. Okay. So I like to kind of come over here. Statement P is you work for 3 months. I'm going to run out of room here. And then statement Q is what? You have saved enough money for a down payment. Okay? So this asks me, and you're going to have homework like this. This will be on your test. The converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. Remember, the converse simply switches the order. It doesn't negate anything. So now the if is going to be attached to you will have saved enough money for a down payment. So if you have saved enough money for a down payment, then we take this P. You have worked the job for at least 3 months. You have worked for at least 3 months. Okay? So that is what the converse would be. The inverse doesn't change the order, but it does negate. So P is working for 3 months, so the negation of P is if you didn't work for at least 3 months, then the negation of Q, you have not saved enough money for the down payment. Okay? And I probably should say of a used car, but I'm running out of room. Okay? How about the contrapositive? Okay? Symbolically, the contrapositive negates both and changes the order. So now the if is attached to the negation of Q. Remember, Q was the down payment. So if you have not saved enough for a down payment, then the negation of P, you have not worked for at least 3 months. Okay? So, you're going to be asked to write the converse, the inverse of contrapositive of some conditional statements. Okay? All right. And then if you want to draw a Venn diagram, things like that. But these, I think, are what you really need to know. The converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. So make sure you're taking notes on that. That will be on your test. Okay? That will be on the final as well. Okay? So, number 2, I want you guys to do on your own. Okay? If Allie practices the violin for 3 hours a day, then Allie will make first chair. So again, you may want to make a note, okay? Allie practices the violin for 3 hours a day. Is statement P. Q is, whoops, Allie will make first chair. Okay? So write the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive of those. And again, the converse is Q implies P. The inverse is not P implies not Q. And the contrapositive is not Q implies not P. Okay? So eventually we're going to be getting to some arguments, okay? And we're going to be asking if Allie doesn't, whether or not these things are true or false, okay? So for right now, we're just asking you to write these things down. Remember, the contrapositive has the same truth as the original statement. P implies Q. Okay? All right. Then we get a little bit into equivalent statements and biconditionals. Okay? Equivalent statements are statements that always have the same truth value as the other one. Okay? A good example of a biconditional is, which you should remember from algebra class, a triangle is a right triangle if and only if it satisfies the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay, so that goes in both directions. In other words, P implies Q and Q implies P. Okay. So typically definitions of things like that are biconditional. Okay. A puppy is a young dog. Okay. A young dog is also a puppy. Okay. So that is a biconditional. If it's a young dog, then it is a puppy. If it's a puppy, then it is a young dog. So those are biconditional. They go both ways. That's the unique case where a conditional is the same truth as its converse. Okay? All right. Now we're going to get into De Morgan's laws, okay? Which hopefully you've looked at a little bit. Okay. But if we consider the statement, Jeremy is trying out for the basketball team and he is planning to run for student council. Okay. So this was the and statement. This is a conjunction. Okay. Not that, again, I'm going to be testing on that definition, but the and was a conjunction. In order for this statement to be true, remember both statements have to be true. So for an and statement, both sides have to be true. Therefore, to negate it, all we need to do is say that at least one of these has to be false. Okay? And this is where De Morgan's laws come in. The negation of an and is equivalent to the negation of P or the negation of Q. So the negation of an and, the symbol gets flipped over, and I negate both statements. Okay? So I'm going to do a couple of these. Shannon will not be taking any classes this summer, and she will be traveling to Alaska. So this is statement P, and this is statement Q. So the negation of this will be that Shannon will, the negation of will not is will. Shannon will be taking classes this summer. And then here's another key. The negation of an and is an or. Or she will not be traveling to Alaska. She will not be traveling to Alaska. Okay? So a big thing here, the negation of an and becomes an or, and you get rid of the parentheses. So the negation of not P and Q is not P or not Q. Okay? So I'm going to ask you guys to do 2, 3, and 4 on yours. All right? All right, so it shouldn't be a huge stretch of the imagination. Okay? The or statement, remember, is called a disjunction. Okay? Because it links two simple statements with an or. So now we're going to be negating an or. Okay? So if we take this, Let's see, what's the statement here? Jasmine is trying out for senior choir, or she plays for the girls' volleyball team. Okay, so to negate that, I want to say that neither one of those are true. So the negation of an or, the negation of P or Q, is an and statement, not P and not Q. Okay, so let's jump down here to number 1. Jake will be taking classes this summer, or he will not be traveling to Costa Rica. Okay, so if this is statement P and this is statement Q, I have this, P or Q, and if I want to negate that, it is going to be not P and not Q. So I will say Jake will not be taking classes this summer. Jake will not take classes. And, okay, again, to negate an or, I'm going to use an and. He will not be traveling to Costa Rica. Okay, so again, something else for your notes. The negation of an or statement is an and statement. So make sure we get that done. These are what are called De Morgan's laws. Okay? All right. Then the last one is negating a conditional. Okay? And it says here, this is perhaps the most difficult of negation. Okay? The hardest thing to remember is that the negation of an if-then is not another if-then. Okay? So, if I take this statement, if you give me $1, then I will give you a cup of lemonade. Okay? The only way it can be proven that this statement is false is if the antecedent is met, and if you remember your truth table for these, the antecedent is true, okay, that you do give me $1, and then the consequence still doesn't follow. So you give me $1 and then I don't give you lemonade, you're going to call me a liar, right? That's the negation. So the negation of if P then Q is a conjunction. So the negation of if P then Q, the negation of this is P and not Q. So I give you $1 and you give me $1 and I don't give you lemonade. Okay? So these are the tricky ones. So what is this? If I practice my multiplication tables, I will pass calculus. So this is P and this is Q. So to negate that, I'm looking for P and not Q. Don't use another if then. And I do this, this is going to show up on your test for sure. Right away, I know it's not these two because they have an if statement in them. So it can't be that. So what is this? I practice my multiplication tables and I don't pass calculus. That's the one I'm looking for. Okay? So be careful with this. The negation of a conditional statement is an and. So if I pack for 5 hours today, then I'll be ready for the move tomorrow. So the